Good evening, everyone, and welcome inside the bubble. I'm Brandon Spratt. Back on the other side of the desk is Matt Harrington after your trip over the weekend. How was it? And good to see you back here in studio.
Yeah, it was good. Nice to get away for a couple of days, and I'm excited to be back hosting the show this week.
All right, so we have the boys state tournament preview. It's the week we've all been waiting for to wrap up the high school season, and we're going to get into the road to state here in just a moment. We'll start on the Class A side. We're going to go team by team on the bracket, just like we did for the girls, and look at sort of the season as a whole, the section road, and how they got there. We'll start in boys Class A, the 11 a.m. game, the quarterfinals on Wednesday, and it is the number 2 seed, the Hermantown Hawks. They make the state tournament for, I believe, the 5th year in a row after they lost to Greenway. They've made like 12 of 13 state tournament appearances, Matt, and this team, they got through Section 7A, but it wasn't quite as easy as they're maybe used to, as they had some tight games in the semifinals and final.
Yeah, they did have some tight games, Brandon, and I think that maybe surprised a couple of folks out there as we'll take a look at that Section 7A bracket as well. They handled North Shore no problem, but Hibbing Chisholm, they scored the game winner in that one with, I think, 15 seconds left, so very impressive from Hibbing Chisholm to put up a good fight. And then, of course, they beat Rockridge 3-1 in the final, so that's how they got there. Maybe closer than people thought, but again, they once again prevail in that section.
And we're going to take a look now at some team highlights from the squad. As we said, they are in the 2 seed under head coach Pat Andrews. 19 state tournament trips, 4 state titles, including last year as they look to go back-to-back. And Matt, a strong record against tournament teams as well at 6-1. That's not just single A teams either.
No, it's not. And that one loss, of course, was to Warroad, who we'll get into a little bit more later. But an impressive record and trying to go back-to-back state championships for the first time since 2016-2017.
All right, and their opponent in the 11 a.m. first quarterfinal on Wednesday will be the Laverne Cardinals, coming in with a very strong record as they win Section 3A. We're going to take a look at the bracket, and it is Laverne and Hermantown meeting for not the first time. They actually met back in 2017, and that was when Laverne made its last state tournament appearance. So the Cardinals back at the X-Mat.
Yeah, and from what I can remember, Brandon, that Laverne game against Hermantown was a close one as well. That was the year that Hermantown had a lot of close calls en route to the championship. But Laverne, they played very well in Section 3A, and looking forward to seeing them back at the Xcel Energy Center.
Speaking of Section 3A, time to look at that bracket and see how Laverne made their way to the X. They started off with a quarterfinal win against Wyndham, beating Mankato East in a tight 2-3, and then they knock off the number 1 seed, the New Ulm Eagles, in that section final. Matt, a mostly chalky bracket until the final.
Yeah, and New Ulm had been playing very well up to that point as well, especially against fellow conference teams in the Big South Conference. So maybe a little bit of a surprise there. I picked Laverne to win that section, so it's nice to see them back. But New Ulm was a tough opponent to beat, but they handled them very nicely in that section championship.
And we look at now the team profile for Laverne as they follow their girls team and making it to the X this year. Head coach Philip Paquette, and they make their 3rd state tournament trip, first since 2017. What's going to stand out here, though? No games against tournament teams from either class. A little bit of an unknown. However, the Cardinals coming in scorching hot, 10-0 in their last 10 games.
Yeah, and they score a lot of goals, Brandon. 5.46 goals per game is a strong number. And yeah, you mentioned no games against tournament teams. I think they're the only team in the field that has not played any of the other tournament teams in both A or AA. So that'll be interesting to see how they adjust to a heavy team like Hermantown.
Keeping it on the top half of the bracket, time to look at the number 3 seed in Class A, and it is the Mahtomedi Zephyrs, the 2020 champions, returning to the X out of Section 4. They'll play in the 1, or shall we say 1:30-ish p.m. game on Wednesday in the first session. The Zephyrs with a record of 20-8. Matt, back in the state tournament, they played a very tough schedule this year. Obviously, they're no stranger to Hermantown. Now they're on the same side of the bracket again.
Yeah, this is a Mahtomedi team that's gotten hot at the right time. They went through a little bit of a rough patch, I think, where they lost 4 of 5 games or something of that nature, but they have one of the most challenging schedules in the state regardless of class, and they played very well in the last handful of games, and so no surprise to see them earn that number 3 seed.
And now we look at the Section 4 Single A bracket. All these games were played at Aldrich Arena. They knocked off the Governors of St. Paul Johnson as well as St. Paul Academy before defeating Chisago Lakes in the section final. That game, this section was kind of stood out for not really having a strong 2 or 3 seed. However, Chisago Lakes pushed the Zephyrs. That was a 1-1 game heading into the third.
Yeah, credit to the Wildcats of Chisago Lakes for giving them a game, certainly. And this has kind of been a section that has been run by Mahtomedi, obviously, for quite some time. But Chisago Lakes put up a good effort in an otherwise pretty weak section overall.
Let's take a look at the Zephyrs team profile under head coach Jeff Poschel, who's been there a very long time. 14 state tournament trips overall, as they obviously were in the field last year. They won that state title in 2020 against Hermantown head-to-head. Another team playing very well in their last 10. They're 9-1. You mentioned they're battle-tested, having played Hill Murray a couple times in the Metro East Conference. Of course, we'll see Hill Murray a little bit later as well in the AA field. But what stands out from the team here, Matt?
Well, the special teams aren't necessarily as high as some of the other teams, but you look at the goals per game, 4.93 is also a very strong number. So I think they're in a good position to advance to the semifinals. And I think if obviously Hermantown can win, I think that Mahtomedi could certainly give them a game in the semifinals.
And the Zephyrs' opponent in that second quarter final, it's going to be another returning team, the Alexandria Cardinals. They are unseeded in this bracket. They earned the 5 seed, I believe, last year, or they were in that 4-5 matchup. Alexandria, 14-12-1. They had a slow start to the season, Matt, but this team got hot at the right time to make the trip to the X, and they're not going to be an easy out by any means.
And no, they're not at all. And you mentioned the poor start. They started 1-9 on the season, and remarkably, they turned it around, earned the top seed in Section 6, and they needed double overtime to beat Fergus Falls in the section championship game. So they have been playing so well lately. It's been an incredible turnaround from where they were at the start of the year.
Let's look at that section bracket now and hit up some highlights here. And it was all top seeds winning in this section. Alex defeating Breckenridge, Wahpeton, Wadena, Deer Creek, and then Fergus Falls. But you mentioned that double overtime championship game. Not so straightforward for the Cardinals.
No, not at all. And they earned their way, certainly. I believe they outshot Fergus Falls pretty heavily in that game. But again, it's been an incredible turnaround, especially to earn the top seed and then take care of business in that section.
So Alexandria's team profile now. We'll take a look. They're under head coach Josh Myers. They've made 7 total state tournament trips, 0-2 against the field this year, so not too many games there, but 8-2 in their last 10. You mentioned the slow start, but this team rounding into form. This is actually an interesting note. I believe Mahtomedi and Alexandria are actually 2 of the bigger schools in terms of enrollment in the single A field, so these are 2 pretty big schools, pretty big communities. Expect a good crowd for this one.
Yeah, certainly. And keep in mind, too, this is an Alexandria team that made the Class A semifinals last year at the state tournament. They beat Minneapolis in the quarterfinal round. So, again, I think you're going to see a well-represented student section, perhaps from Alexandria, even though it is a little bit of a drive to the Twin Cities. But this is a good team that's playing really good hockey right now.
Matt, you make a good point. This was actually the third-place matchup last year with Mahtomedi coming out on top. That's the top half of the boys Class A bracket. We're going to take a quick break and come back with the bottom half where we'll see who earned the number 1 seed coming up in just a moment.
Behind every world-class athlete, there's a team who takes extra care to support them. At Affinity Plus, we take extra care with all your banking goals, from checking accounts to credit cards. Our biggest victory? helping you win in the ways that matter most. Affinity Plus.
Your college experience begins with your dream. Your time at St. Cloud State will uniquely be your own, but your journey will be guided by our community. Be you. Be bold. Be a Husky.
What if there was a place where everything was hockey?
Oh, he can skate. Here comes Steves in on goal, all alone.
In Minnesota, there is.
Scores!
Welcome back to Inside the Bubble and our boys state tournament preview show. We just took a look at the top half of the Class A bracket. Time to get into the bottom half. We'll start with the number 1 seed, and earning the number 1 seed is the Warroad Warriors. Certainly not a surprise after their, well, do we want to call it an undefeated season? I know that's a little bit of a gray area sometimes when there's a tie in there, but they haven't lost yet this year, Matt. And Warroad has obviously earned the number 1 seed for their incredible season.
Yeah, no question. Of course, they beat Hermantown. That was a game that we had right here on MN Hockey TV. You and me were on the call for that one, and this is just such a talented team. They've got some really explosive offensive talent with Shagaby and Pilgrim, of course, on that top line. Really good defender in Lund as well, who's been good. And, of course, you've got a Frank Brimsick Award finalist in Hampton Sukinski in goal. This is a elite team that might be the best team regardless of class. They have looked the parts, and certainly just that one tie to Sartell. That was in their final regular season game, of course. But, yeah, I mean, undefeated. That means no losses. They fit the category, in my opinion.
All right, let's look at the 8A bracket now. This was a deep section this year. It was the top seeds advancing all the way through here. We had Mr. Hockey finalist Tyler Hennon from Kitson County Central, and but in the end, top seeds winning all the way through. Warroad defeating East Grand Forks for the 3rd time this year.
Yeah, and that was an East Grand Forks team that gave Warroad a couple of really tough battles during the regular season, but it seems like Warroad just handled them from the get-go in that 3rd game, which of course was the section championship, so Warroad looked pretty dominating in that. And no surprise, I think we thought maybe East Grand Forks could keep it a little bit closer than they did. But again, Warroad just showing their dominance overall in this section.
Looking at the team profile now for the Warriors under Coach Jay Hardwick. They've made 24 state tournament trips and have won 4 state titles, but none since 2005, which is a little bit surprising for a program like Warroad. Some more highlights, 4-0 against tournament teams this year. And Matt, you mentioned special teams already. That is an elite special teams that the Warriors have.
It is. I mean, that power play almost at 34%, which is really strong, and the penalty kill in the mid-90s as well. Those are those kind of things that are so important to a state championship team, and Warroad checks all the boxes for those kind of things.
And time to find out who the Warriors will be playing is the other unseeded team in the bracket, the St. Cloud Cathedral Crusaders out of Section 5, Single A. And they had to grind through their section. They go to overtime as well, overcoming a bit of a deficit. We'll look at that bracket now and see where they advance to the state tournament. They defeat Little Falls in the section final. This was obviously a deep section as well. Cathedral, actually the 3 seed. I think they might be one of the only 3 seeds to make their way to St. Paul, Matt. And they had to win on the road at Monticello and then beat a difficult Little Falls Flyers team as well.
Yeah, Little Falls was a team that was playing really well down the stretch of this year. They did get into our CARE 11 top 11 rankings as well. St. Cloud Cathedral was a team that did not get in at all in those rankings this season. But again, they're playing well at the right time. You picked them to win that section, of course, and they did indeed. A lot of people had them as a scary number 3 seed, and they proved it, winning that section over Little Falls in the championship game.
So the Crusaders making their 11th state tournament trip and this is the first, though, under their second-year head coach, Robert Stocker. Of course, the one state title back in 2019 when they defeated Greenway. And despite a 16-12 record, just a little bit over 500, their goal difference kind of stands out as being pretty strong. They are just 5-5 in their last 10. A little bit of a mixed bag here with the Crusaders. This is a young team with a lot of talent, though.
It is a young team, and of course, they've got the experience, though, as well. They've played in some tough section games over the last couple of seasons. And, of course, they won that state title back in 2019. That was, of course, the year that Greenway beat Hermantown in that Section 7A playoffs and went on that magical run. But, again, this is a young team. Again, the record's not going to stand out to you as much, but certainly could be a threat to Warroad.
All right, and now our final quarterfinal matchup. Of course, this is the 4-5, which is always usually a good one in the nightcap in St. Paul. Wednesday night, we start with the 4 seed, the Orono Spartans, 23-5 this season. A very strong season under their first-year head coach, Sean Fish. They came out of the very deep Section 2 Single A, as we'll pop that bracket up here and take a look. And Matt, Orono was that number 1 seed in the section, but you were on the call for their game against Minneapolis, and that was an entertaining one, to say the least.
Yeah, it sure was. And keep in mind, too, that they needed overtime to beat the 8th seed Hutchinson the day before that. So this has been a crazy section bracket for Orono. Minneapolis tested them. They ended up pulling away 8-5 for the victory. And then they handled Delano, of course, in the section finals. So it wasn't an easy road for Orono, but credit to them for playing through a lot of difficult teams, including Minneapolis. So interested to see how they do.
So they defeated their rivals Delano in an electric section final. Shout out to Waconia as well, who made their first ever section semifinal as a program. Looking at the team capsule here, 10 state tournament trips for the Spartans. They're making their first state tournament appearance since 2018 when they won their one and only title. And Sean Fish, as I said, he's their first-year head coach coming over from the girls program, so he's not a stranger to the Orono Spartans team. 7-3 in their last 10, 23-5 overall. They've had a very strong season. And what stands out, Matt?
Well, yeah, I think the record 23-5, and 2 of those losses were right at the end of the regular season. They had a couple of tough Metro West games against Benilde St. Margaret's and Chanhassen that they lost, but they recovered, and they have played well again in sections. They were tested, certainly among the teams that was tested the most in sections, but in the end, they come out on top, and again, it's credit to them because they had a really strong regular season, very deserving to be here at the state tournament.
Time to find out who the Spartans will play. And in a year with no newcomers, no teams making their first tournament appearance, it's a relative newcomer in the Northfield Raiders earning the 5 seed. They were also 23-5, just their second ever state tournament appearance and first since 2017. The Raiders winning a difficult Section 1 Single A. We'll look at that bracket now as they defeated New Prague in the section final. They had to get by Dodge County in the semis and Rochester Lourdes in the quarters. A lot of teams up on the board in this bracket, Matt. You have La Crescent Hoka, who earned that 5 seed and won a home playoff game. Or actually, they got a home playoff game in there. But Northfield, at the end of the day, Cream kind of rising to the top in this section. They kind of ran things all year in Section 1.
They did, and I think maybe the Southern Minnesota teams don't get the credit that they deserve, but this is a team that's been in our top 10 pretty much the whole year. They've been in the top 5 as well for quite some time. They're a deep team. I've seen them play a couple of times, and they play really well on the puck, and well-deserving to be here, like you mentioned, just the second time ever they've been in the state tournament.
Looking at that team capsule now, Mike Luckraft bringing them to their second state tournament appearance and first since 2017. They had an upset win over Delano that year in the quarterfinals, making it to the second round. 0-2 against tournament teams, but some very strong stats over there on the right-hand column. Great special teams, 9-1 in their last 10, and the goal difference really stands out too.
The goal difference does, 5.46 goals per game, and that power play is really good as well, almost 40%, which is among one of the highest marks in the state. So watch out. You don't want to take penalties against this team.
Probably one of the better quarterfinal matchups we've had in Class A in some time. Both teams 23-5, and that's sure to be a good one in the nightcap. And Matt, just kind of getting your overall thoughts on the field, I think this might be one of the deeper Class A fields that we've seen.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think there's been, past couple of years, there's been a couple teams like Hermantown where we thought, well, they could cruise to victory in the state tournament. But yes, Hermantown and Warroad have kind of been 1A and 1B throughout the year, but you cannot sleep on Orono. You cannot sleep on Northfield and some of these other teams as well. It's loaded. And Matamina, of course, can't forget the Zephyrs either. So this is a loaded bracket. And I think, normally on Wednesdays we kind of get these blowouts where some of these unseeded teams struggle. I don't think that's going to happen this year. I think we've got some deep teams this year as well. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, and of course, all top 4 seeds have won a state title before. Cathedral as well. So over half of this field has won state tournament titles. It's some familiar names, but obviously some great programs. That's going to do it for the Class A bracket. When we return, we move on to the AA bracket. You're watching Inside the Bubble, and our boys state tournament preview. We'll be back in just a moment.
They say good things come to those who wait. But greatness, that's a different beast. It doesn't come when it's called. It won't wander up to those who do nothing. You have to bait it with the sweat you leave on the ice. You gotta push through the pain, smile through every ache, and suffer every shift. You gotta chase it. All in the name of the game you love. Because greatness comes to those who take it.
Behind every world-class athlete, there's a team who takes extra care to support them. At Affinity Plus, we take extra care with all your banking goals, from checking accounts to credit cards. Our biggest victory? Helping you win in the ways that matter most. Affinity Plus.
Welcome back to our special Inside the Bubble. It's a boys state tournament preview edition. We are halfway through. We've gone through the Class A bracket, and now we are moving on to the Class 2A bracket that will kick off on Thursday afternoon at the Xcel Energy Center. Let's take a look at the first team in the field that will be playing in the 11 a.m. game, and that is the 2 seed, the Maple Grove Crimson, winners of Section 5 AA. Of course, the Crimson last year made it all the way to the state championship game, ultimately falling to their rival, the Andover Huskies. But Brandon, they're back in the tournament, and this is a really good team.
Yeah, I think Maple Grove's kind of flown under the radar a little bit this season, personally. They thought they were going to get Landon Gunderson back. Unfortunately, has missed the season with an injury. But Mr. Hockey finalist Finn Brink has really been the catalyst, the straw that stirs the drink, if you will. And this is a very experienced Maple Grove team. They're just so deep every year. They could just roll seniors and just... They've been doing it for a couple years now. I think this is 4 in a row for them at the X.
4 in a row it is. Let's take a look at how they got to the state tournament in the Section 5 AA bracket. This one got kind of a nerve-wracking for top-seeded Rogers in the semifinals. They came back to beat Centennial, but in the end, a pretty comprehensive effort, if you will, Brandon, from Maple Grove in the championship game. They looked in control pretty much the whole way against Rogers.
They did, and honestly, the Champlin Park game was probably the scary one for them in the section semis. Champlin Park came in with a lot of energy. They had already beaten them this season. Obviously, Rogers had gotten a win and a tie against Maple Grove as well, so it was a little bit of a revenge tour, if you will, through the section from avenging some regular season losses. But Maple Grove has been the team to beat. We expected this a little bit from them come section playoff time.
Let's take a look now at the team info for Maple Grove. Again, 22-5-1 regular season record. They started 2-2, but as you can tell, they've turned that around quite a bit in recent games. Again, 5-0 as well against the tournament field, which is one of the stronger marks in any of the classes. And the numbers as well. How about that power play? 42.9% for Maple Grove, and they score a lot of goals as well. This is a team that has no problem finding the back of the net.
Yeah, the record against tourney teams really stood out to me because, again, I feel like it's been done a little bit under the radar. Again, the Crimson have not lost to a tournament team. Obviously, their head-to-head win over Edina in the opening weekend of the season helped out from the seeding process. State trips as well. They've made 6, although all of them coming in the last 10 years. They've become a perennial team at the X. I was surprised to see just 6 because we've just come to expect Maple Grove to be in the tournament year after year, but still looking for that first title are the Crimson.
They were so close last year, and we'll see what they can do this year. Let's see who they'll be taking on in the quarterfinal round. That would be the Cretin-Derham Hall Raiders out of Section 3AA. Back in the state tournament for the second year in a row under head coach Matt Funk. And Brandon, this is a team that started off well. They faltered a little bit down the stretch, lost a couple of key games in the Suburban East, but they found their stride at the right time, winning against their arch rival St. Thomas Academy in the section final.
Yeah, and this was, again, a Mr. Hockey finalist kind of carrying things for them in Jake Fisher, just the heart and soul of that team. Obviously, they had to replace a goaltender this year. They've had a lot of injuries, I know, as well, and some young players coming along at the right time. So just really things coming together, but I think Cretin leaned on some of that experience they got from getting to the X last year. That's one thing that's going to stand out with this state tournament field. You're going to notice a lot of returning teams from the 2022 field.
Let's take a look now at the bracket in 3AA and how Cretin-Derham Hall got here. St. Thomas Academy, of course, had the bye into the semifinals. They upended Eastview, who, of course, knocked them out in the semifinal round last year. Cretin took care of Rosemont and then also took care of St. Thomas Academy in that Section 3AA championship as well. So we'll look at the team info for the Raiders, and of course 18-9-1. They do have one of the higher loss numbers in the state tournament field, but again had some tough non-conference games as well, and some of the seeding did not help as well, given that, for example, they lost to Lakeville South, who we'll see later, and they got a higher seed than them, so they are not seeded in this year's tournament. But again, some of the numbers for them, 31.8%, very strong on the power play. But again, 5-5 in their last 10, but you get hot at the right time and anything can happen.
Yeah, the goals against number stands out a little bit too, 2.86, maybe a little high for some tournament teams we've seen. However, they kind of wrote the ship a little bit, if you will, in section play. I think they played some really good defense against both Rosemont and St. Thomas Academy. So maybe it's just a case of kind of rounding into form defensively at the right time. Certainly going to have to be on their game to upend the Crimson.
Yeah, Raiders looking to have a better quarterfinal game than they did last year. Of course, lost to Prior Lake 6-0 in the quarterfinal round. So we'll move on to the second quarterfinal game in the Class AA tournament. And our first team is the Edina Hornets, winners of Section 6AA. The Hornets had a poor start to the year, to say the least, 0-3. But Brandon, this team was among the best in AA the rest of the year.
They absolutely were. They get the better of Wyzetta in the section final, which we'll see in a moment, after a 7-0 loss to end the regular season. A pretty remarkable turnaround there. And they're obviously led, by Jackson Nevers, the University of Minnesota commit, and a junior, and then the Jolly Green Giant, Robbie Klarkowski, in goal of Brimsic finalist, had the game of his life, in my opinion, in that section final. He was incredible.
He was incredible indeed. Let's take a look at that 6AA bracket, how the Hornets got back to state tournament. This is the second year in a row the Hornets will be at the XL Energy Center. And as you see there, Holy Angels, they put up a good fight against Wyzetta, ultimately falling. And then, of course, Edina taking care of Benilde. But again, this was a 2-1 game, Brandon. You were on the call for it. What were your thoughts on how Edina got this done? It's a team that's got a lot of experience as well.
It is. And well, if you've seen Edina and Wayzata play, Coach O'Leary, Coach Giles, those teams are like mirror images of one another. There's not a lot of space out there. However, there were some good chances. Both goaltenders, Will Ingeman for Wayzata and Robbie Klarkowski for Edina, were fantastic. It was just a classic hockey game. Whoever won that was really going to be deserving of a top, probably 2 or 3 seed at state.
Certainly indeed. And let's go one step further. Take a look at the team info here for the Hornets. 26-1 is their regular season record. Of course, you think about the fact that they started 0-3 on the year. It's been a remarkable turnaround, very strong season. As always, it seems like for the Hornets. That state tournament seed is incorrect. It should say they are the 3 seed in the state tournament, but 41 trips to the state tournament. Of course, 13 state titles as well. They got it done in 2019, and they've got another good chance to do it again and add that to that list and make it 14.
Yeah, Matt, I was looking at the graphic here. I was wondering if you were going to list out all the years of the state titles, but we just went with the number. That's how many Edina has won, of course. Just a legendary program. Kurt Giles gets them back for the 41st trip in program history, which is just remarkable. There's good experience against the AA field, or against the state tournament field as a whole. The 3-4-1 record, don't let that fool you, basically. It was a Maple Grove loss very early, a Moorhead loss early as part of that 0-3 start, and then a couple losses as well to Minnetonka. So I think Edina is a team rounding into form, and speaking of Moorhead, we'll see them soon as well.
We will indeed. The Hornets, by the way, in case you're wondering, have been to over half of the state tournaments that have ever existed for boys hockey, so very impressive number for them. And as you see there, Moorhead is indeed the opponent for the Edina Hornets. The Spuds representing Section 8 AA, and really the only true team outside of the Twin Cities metro area in this AA state tournament field. We'll take a look at that 8 AA brackets of how the Spuds got to the state tournament. They, of course, played Roseau in that section final, and this was a dominating effort. Maybe caught us a little bit off guard of just how good they looked. I picked Sartell St. Stephen to upset them. I was wrong there, and certainly they proved me wrong. They're looking really good right now.
Yeah, this was a bracket that, especially about halfway through the season when Moorhead was lingering around 500, we were looking at 4 or 5 different teams that might get to the X, but Moorhead really put the foot on the pedal, so to speak, as the regular season went on. And like you said, dominating wins over Sartell St. Stephen and Roseau. I don't think this is a team anybody wants to play right now.
No, certainly not. We'll look at the team info now for the Spuds. This is their 20th trip to the state tournament, and remarkably, they have not won a state championship in their first 19 appearances. Of course, trying to change that this year. Another thing that stands out to you about this Spuds team, they have won 10 games in a row after being 9-9 on the year. Like you mentioned, don't want to play them right now. This is a team that is among the hottest in the state.
Yeah, they lost a lot to graduation last year. They're working in some sophomores and whatnot from a Bantam AA team that actually won state a year ago. So we know that this program has a lot of talent, and I think they're finding it at the right time. I actually saw them in their regular season finale against Hill Murray and was really, really impressed. Again, I don't think it's a team anybody wants to see right now, and obviously that Edina Moorhead matchup is one we've seen a few times over the years. Certainly,
and it's a team as well that likes to keep things close. A lot of low-scoring game for the Spuds as well. So there is your first half of the AA brackets here for the Class AA State Tournament here on Inside the Bubble. Brandon Spratt and Matt Harrington. We're going to step aside for just a moment. When we come back, we will reveal the bottom half of the AA bracket. Welcome back to our Boys State Tournament preview edition here of Inside the Bubble. Brandon Spratt and Matt Harrington back with you. We're halfway through revealing the AA field, and let's go ahead and look at the bottom half of the AA bracket that will kick off on Thursday. The number 1 overall seed in the Boys AA tournament is the Minnetonka Skippers, who are back in the state tournament for the first time since they won it all back in 2018. This is a team that has had a tremendous year, Brandon, only 2 losses, and they have looked like a state tournament team the last handful of weeks, pretty much the whole season.
Yeah, I alluded to this earlier with a lot of returning teams. What's interesting, though, is your number 1 seed, Minnetonka, is the only team out of 8 in the AA field that is not returning from a year ago. But, you know, I think we talked to a few coaches around the program. They knew they had a really good group this year. They had a lot of sophomores a year ago. They didn't get out of a section semifinal, but they knew that group was going to grow up and mature. And, boy, they've had a great season.
They have indeed. That Section 2 AA bracket now. And how they got there, they had a great battle with the Chanhassen Storm in double overtime of the section final. Of course, Chanhassen was trying to get to the state tournament for the first time in their program history. But again, Shakopee, that game looked like Minnetonka dominated them pretty good. And again, this is a team that's loaded with talent from top to bottom, especially those first 3 forward lines. We're kind of talking a little bit after the game of just how deep this team is.
Yeah, the third line was the standout line against Minnetonka, and it really speaks to their depth. They're going to roll 3 lines and 3 D pairs at the X as they've done all season. A lot of programs don't do that. Condolences to Chan. They absolutely proved themselves to be legit in that section final. I think this is absolutely a top 5 team in the state.
100%. Let's look now at the team info for the Minnetonka Skippers, and you see the record there, 26-2 under head coach Sean Goldsworthy. 7 trips to state, of course. We mentioned their last coming in 2018. And the goals per game among the higher ones, certainly in Class AA, in that winning streak, certainly over 10 games. It's been an impressive run down the stretch for the Skippers.
Yeah, Matt, and an interesting note for you as well as we look ahead to the tournament, or back to the tournaments of 5 years ago. Who were our champions in 2018? It was Orono in Class A, Minnetonka in AA. Both of those programs making their first state tournament appearances since they won the title. I don't know if that's an omen or a coincidence. I guess we're going to find out. But Minnetonka 1.11 goals allowed per game. It just really speaks to just how stout and how tough they are to score against.
Certainly a little bit of deja vu with Orono and Minnetonka back in the state tournament. As we'll go now back and see who the Skippers will be playing in that 6 p.m. game on Thursday night, and it will be the Hill Murray Pioneers out of Section 4 AA. It wasn't the best regular season, to say the least, but the Pioneers got a little help, and they earned their way into the state tournament with a comprehensive victory against Gentry Academy in that section final.
Yeah, and speaking of quarterfinal matchups we've seen before, some folks were quick to point out that in 2018, when Minnetonka won the title, who did they play in the quarterfinals? Of course, that would be Hill Murray. So things kind of repeating themselves a little bit here, but you know, the Pioneers, we know they're always going to be battle tested. They played a ton of games against the tournament field this year, which we'll get to. But Section 4 AA was not without an upset or two. I think we've alluded to that on some previous shows.
Yeah, let's look at that bracket. It was certainly one of the crazier ones in the state. And overall, the top seeds held serve, but White Bear Lake was the only number 1 seed in the section of any section of the 16 that failed to qualify for the section championship game. They got upended by the Gentry Academy Stars in the semifinal round. And then, of course, Woodbury knocked off Stillwater. That was potentially one of the bigger threats for Hill Murray to fail to get to the championship game, but of course they got Woodbury. It was a tough game against them as well, but they took care of business, and they looked really good, I'd say, in that Gentry Academy game. I think we were talking, saying, you know, Gentry Academy, they're playing well, they've got a better record, but again, this is where that experience comes in handy for the Pioneers.
Yeah, I mean, the Pioneers have been there, done that. We'll see it on the next slide, but 33 state tournament trips for this program. Certainly one of the legendary programs across the state. And head coach Bill Lechner, he's been around the block a time or two. He's gotten more than a few teams down to St. Paul.
Yeah, you see that record on your screen. Only one game above 500, but thanks to those 3 section wins, they get above that mark. And, of course, head coach, as you mentioned, Bill Lechner, legendary coach for the Pioneers. Not the strongest regular season by any means, but 2.93 goals per game scored and 2.25 goals against. They've had some close results, and if they're going to want to win, they're going to have kind of similar results, rely on their goaltending as well.
Yeah, and they have a good one in Jack Erickson, not a Brimsic finalist, but a very strong goaltender as well. mentioned this with Moorhead, but this is not a team I would want to play in the first round either. I don't care what the record is. If it's Hill Murray at the state tournament, throw the record out. You know there's going to be good fan support there. You see a 2-8 record against tournament teams. Yeah, it's not going to stand out, but they've played more games against tournament teams than anyone. I know Sean Goldsworthy's Minnetonka Skippers are not going to overlook this quarterfinal by any means.
No, they're not, and certainly this was a similar regular season. Didn't have the strongest one when they won their last state title back in 2020. So we will move to our final game of the Class AA quarterfinal round, and as you see there, it's the 4th seeded, the Andover Huskies, who are the defending state tournament champions out of Section 7 AA. They, of course, were the 2 seed in that section, but took down Duluth East pretty handily in that section final. Brandon, this is probably the most explosive top line in hockey with Thorson, Conway, and Moore. It's a good loaded line, a team that's been there, done that, as you mentioned. Look out for this Huskies team.
Yeah, Thorson and Conway have a pair of Mr. Hockey finalists, and last I checked, they're the champs until someone knocks them off. Andover coming in as a 4 seed, maybe a little bit under the radar as well. But, we talked about this as a little bit of a theme from the girls tournament too. You can use TV timeouts to your advantage when you get to the state tournament. So expect to see those 3 on the ice a lot in St. Paul.
Let's look at the 7AA bracket, how the Huskies got back to the Xcel Energy Center for the 4th year in a row. They beat Duluth East, of course, in that final. And Grand Rapids didn't give a ton of a test to Andover, but again, you're seeing the strength that the Huskies have, and they looked good in this section, certainly.
Yeah, great season for Duluth East as well. A nice bounce back from a couple down years for that program. But in the end, Andover just a little too much. And one note as well for the Huskies, that top line gets so much attention. They've gotten really solid goaltending this year from Bo Altman as well. So don't overlook that. I think, this is just my personal opinion, but I think whoever comes out of the bottom half of the bracket, whether it's Minnetonka, Andover, maybe somebody else, I like the bottom half as a pretty strong bet to win this tournament.
You may not be wrong. Let's see at the team info here. 21-6-1 for the Huskies. This was a team that had a lot of losses to start the year, including a couple to their conference rival, Maple Grove, who they may see potentially again if they were to meet in the state championship. But the number 4 seed, and of course that goal scoring very high, 5.57 for the Huskies. Anything in particular that stands out to you here? Again, Brandon, they've 9-1 in the last 10. What else stands out to you about this team?
Well, you mentioned the 4 straight state tournament trips, and they've only made 4 in program history. So it's kind of like Maple Grove. It's like we've gotten so used to seeing them. It feels like it's got to be a higher number, but really just speaks to the level of play in sort of the Northwest Suburban right now that we have Maple Grove and Andover as such fixtures. 4 straight state tournaments is an accomplishment. And again, this is the defending champs. They're going to be tough to knock out.
They will be tough to knock out. Let's see who's going to have the opportunity to do that in the quarterfinal round. It is the Lakeville South Cougars. They have become a regular here at the Xcel Energy Center over the last handful of years, representing Section 1AA. And Brandon, of the 1 seeds in the sections, this was probably the most comfortable you could predict moving on to the state tournament.
Yeah, Lakeville North, their rivals, crosstown rivals who they met in the section final, didn't have quite as strong of a year. They knocked off Rochester Mayo in the semifinals, but the Cougars, I think flying under the radar a little bit too. I think sometimes we lose those South Suburban teams sometimes, but 21-6-1, they have a nice record against some tournament teams despite maybe not playing quite as many. But, Lakeville South, again, they're part of the furniture as well at the Xcel Energy Center, right? They've become such a fixture in the state tournament, 11 total for the program. And Coach Josh Storm has sort of picked up right where some previous regimes have left off.
Yeah, certainly. And let's take a look at that 1AA bracket, how they got to the state tournament. And pretty much a chalky bracket like we've seen in some other ones. But Rochester Century, the only lower-seeded team to win in the quarterfinal, and then Lakeville North, the 3 seed. It has pretty much been Lakeville versus Lakeville in the final. The last time, by the way, Brandon, that neither Lakeville team qualified for the section final was 2005. So it has been a long time since we have seen a representative different from one of those 2 teams in the state tournament or in the section final for that matter. So certainly they have earned their way, as we'll look now at the team info, 21-6-1. They do get that number 5 seed, and a lot of people are going back and forth on, well, is Creighton the 5? Is Lakeville the 5? Well, Lakeville South did win head-to-head in overtime against the Raiders earlier this year. That's why they get the 5 seed, and a team that's playing well lately, 9-1 in their last 10.
Yeah, 9-1 in their last 10. The only loss in there was a late regular season game to Eastview. But again, I think that just emphasizes a team that's playing well, almost 30% on the power play, 2-1-1 against tournament teams. The tie is against Edina. That was an impressive result as well that I think maybe flew on a little bit under the radar. So this 4-5 matchup, just like the 4-5 matchup on the Class A side, two teams with identical records, 21-6-1, both the Huskies and the Cougars.
Should be an exciting quarterfinal round there against Andover. So there is a look at your state tournament field for AA. Again, 7 of the 8 teams are repeating as their section champions. So the only newcomer, of course, the Minnetonka Skippers. Very similar to what we saw, Brandon, in the girls' state tournament on the Class A side, where 7 of the 8 teams return.
Yeah, and I think it's you see that it can kind of be a little bit cyclical at times, right? You get a team with a nice crop of players in a few classes, and then you can kind of go back to back, and then, in a couple years, someone else will kind of step up. But these teams are very experienced, and what's interesting about this whole field, I think sometimes you see kind of a team, maybe the bright lights get to them a little bit. I don't know if that's what happened with Creighton last year, but I think they're going to be more ready for it this year when they take on Maple Grove, for example.
Certainly, and Andover and Hermantown, of course, are the defending champions, and they are both seeded. Of course, Hermantown number 2 in Class A, and Andover number 4 in AA. So again, the action will kick off on Wednesday with the Class A quarterfinals. The Class AA quarterfinals will be on Thursday, and of course, as always, championships will be on Saturday from the XL Energy Center. So that will wrap it up for our Inside the Bubble Boys State Tournament preview. Thank you so much for tuning in here on KARE 11+. For our entire crew, Pete Wagner, Glenn Gray, and Brandon Spratt, I'm Matt Harrington saying so long from the Meta Sports League studios.